Hi, I'm Dr. Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Dr. Katina Sawyer, and welcome to Thriving at Work, a Worker Being podcast.
You can learn more about us on our website, workerbeing.com, or on social media, or you can support our community. You can find out more about our community at workerbeing.com/community. So today, we're going to be talking about sustainable employment. So my question is kind of a boring question, but I'm going to ask you anyways. Like, if you were to define what makes work sustainable for you personally, how would you define it?
That's a very good question. What makes work sustainable for me? So I'm thinking about, I know we talked about age and retirement in a recent episode, and I'm kind of thinking about this as like, what makes you want to keep going at work in the long haul? And I think it's probably, I might cheat and say two things. I think it's probably people. Like, I think that there are a lot of really awesome people. I mean, I know a reason people don't find work sustainable is also people, but I think in every job that I've had, there's been a person that when I left it or people when I've left it that I've been sad. And so that means I think that part of what makes work sustainable for me is going through it with other people and feeling like you can kind of build those relationships. And then I guess the other thing would be like accomplishing stuff that you're proud of, which I don't think happens frequently, but when it does happen, I feel like it's always a reminder of like, oh, this is why like you put in the time and energy on the days when things aren't so great, because sometimes this is what happens. So I think that's what makes work sustainable for me. What about for you?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I like that. For me, I think there's probably a component of liking what I'm doing, like liking the actual work itself. And I like the people thing you said, like that just keeps coming back to me because I do agree with you. Like when there are people that I, care about in some way at the company, people that I want to do right by, if you will, right? Like I don't want to let them down, what have you. I think that's a motivator for sure. But I think the biggest one is liking the work and knowing that I have the ability to say no.
Yeah, so kind of like autonomy as well, I guess. You're saying like I enjoy it. I like maybe you have some ability to like do something that you like, but also like you feel like you're able to do it on your do stuff you like kind of on your own terms to the extent possible.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Autonomy. I mean, that's obviously we've talked about autonomy before because it is super important. So, I'm glad you made that connection for me because that's totally it. I think that's really it.
Awesome. Yeah. And, that's interesting that you're saying that because you've worked remotely for so many years. And I think that might be part of why you enjoy doing that so much because that's something that's really valuable to you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do love working remote and I do think one of the biggest values of working remotely is that you have a lot of autonomy and flexibility in your life. And even then you can still get overworked and what have you, but I feel like there's a little bit more of a barrier between you and work when you are remote. And that way it can be positive.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that makes a lot of sense and also aligns with probably why, I really enjoy doing what we do too, but it's also like having a, side gig as it would be with us doing Worker Being also provides a lot of autonomy. So that's cool as well.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
I will not be micromanaging you.
No. Yes, we are very good at being independent in our thinking and in our ways while we are joined together as well. But anyway, so I want to hear what they consider sustainable work, and I would be really curious to hear kind of what the takeaways are for our article today.
Yeah. So, just quick shout out to the author. So it's actually a Polish last name. So I'm going to say Roczyniewska is the first author at all. This is a new article about the sustainable employment. And so the first takeaway is just defining it because I think it's really important to understand what sustainable employment is. So sustainable employment is basically a condition in which employees can continuously work productively while maintaining their health and well-being. So it's both you're being productive, you're working hard, but you're also healthy, you're able to do what you need to do to take care of your health, and that well-being is high. And the way they define those things, just as an FYI, like productivity is what you would think, right? It's performance, work quality, etc. Health is both physical and mental health, but well-being is really well-being at work. So kind of what we just talked about, like being happy in your job, committed to the company, things like that. Like if those three components need to be high in order for you to have a sustainable employment.
Okay. So I think that's actually really interesting for people listening that, it resonates some with some of the research that we've been doing too, as a little preview. I think that makes some sense. And, thinking about those different subcomponents, I think that resonates with what people often think about as wellness, but they're sort of laying it out more specifically, which I like because it draws attention to the importance of those components for employers to think about too, which I'm guessing may be part of some of your other takeaways.
Yes, exactly. So the thing to know about takeaway 1 is that there's like a special emphasis on employees being able to contribute overtime because they're maintaining their wellness. The second takeaway is that if you're provided with good job resources, so being able to, have the things you need to do your job well, it impacts productivity and it also impacts well-being at work. So having the resources you need is super important. Takeaway 3 is that there's actually more support for having the right resources, improving your productivity and well-being, than having too many demands hurting your productivity and well-being, if that makes sense. So basically, like, giving more resources is better. Workload is obviously a problem. If workload is much too high, then that kind of goes counter to this. But really, it's less about giving people more demands and more about giving them the right resources.
Okay, so that's really, really interesting. And I'll be curious to hear what resources they count or that they see as particularly important for making sure that people can support wellness in those areas over time. But I think that even more kind of, I guess the focus of that is that the positive is more positive than the negative is negative, right? And so
Exactly.
really dedicating your energy to making sure that people have access to good stuff, maybe if you had to pick between the two, a better selection than trying to spend your time getting rid of bad stuff.
Exactly. Yes. And then the final takeaway. So the fourth takeaway here is that there's actually no contradiction between what improves productivity and what improves well-being. So basically, if employers focus on sustainable employment overall, like, it's going to impact both the employee's performance, productivity, and their wellness. So it all comes down to resources, which I can talk about in a second exactly what they mean here. But the resources are really, really critical, and having the right resources makes people feel good, makes them able to maintain their health better, and it also makes them more productive employees.
Cool. So if you're like listening to this, which you probably wouldn't be listening to this if you felt this way, but if you know someone who's like a grumpus about wellness and is always like, well, this is a business. Like, why should we be focused on wellness? Like, we need to be focused on doing the best thing we can for the business itself. And like, that's what I care about. Like, I guess the takeaway here is good news. They're actually the same conversation.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. Okay,
so
that's awesome.
That's the cool part about this. So it's, super straightforward takeaways, I would say here. We can dive into them a little bit further, but I think exactly what you're saying is right. If leaders, employers really focus on providing the correct resources to employees and their teams, they're going to be winning all over the place because they're going to have that better productivity. And then the employees also going to have that big win of, being able to take care of themselves better.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, well, first of all, sustainable employment. I think it's obvious that we know that if you're able to maintain your health and well-being, that's like a big win. That's a good thing. And then that also will allow employees to be able to be productive over a long period of time, right? So instead of coming in to an organization, an employee comes in and they get, burnt out really fast and they can no longer be productive. Even if they're still employed by you, their productivity is going to tank. So it's actually really important to keep focus on both the productivity, but also the wellness so that they can continue to be, good employees, good team members for the long haul. And we know that when you don't have sustainable employment, it can lead to obviously bad health for employees. But they specifically called out some research that talked about societal costs. So like there was some research in the EU countries where like pension systems are burdened because people have to retire earlier. Health systems can be burdened, et cetera, because employment and that in certain sectors were not sustainable. So it's not just going to impact the employee and the company, but it can have much broader societal impacts too.
Yeah, I feel like there have been times where we have discussed this in our sessions as well. Like, think about the responsibility that companies have to put people back into society after they're done with their day of work, who are energized and feeling good and can contribute to their communities and their families, and versus the idea of putting, people into the community who are just like depleted and exhausted and don't have that level of like vitality in their lives, that can really create some issues and problems for the societal level of, how actually productive we can be as people in and out of work. And I know we've mentioned that in our sessions as well, that we lead through Worker Being, is thinking about like the responsibility that companies have to creating more thriving just worlds, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's not just, the whole like social corporate responsibility thing, right? It's not just about what you're doing within the company, but what is the impact that's broader. And I think more and more leaders are thinking about that, and hopefully that will create much better, more sustainable employment.
Yeah, totally.
So in terms of those job resources, so I talked about how job resources really are the important piece here. With the caveat being workload, right? If people have way too much work, doesn't matter how many resources you provide, unless there are more people to do more work,
right?
It's not going to be helpful. So workload is the one caveat, but the biggest help is resources. So I guess in some ways, people would be a resource, but the resources they talk about in this paper. So just so you know, like they're looking across tons of papers, right? So this is a systemic review of other papers that they kind of are synthesizing here. So what they are talking about when they talk about resources are things like autonomy. So being able to I mentioned autonomy. That's weird. I didn't even think about that earlier. So autonomy. So being able to make your own decisions, being able to kind of figure out how you want to do your work. They talk about control and empowerment, which is really like your influence, being able to participate in decision making at more senior levels, being able to be empowered to speak up, things like that. They talk about justice, so meaning that things are fair as a resource. So having good leadership, having opportunities for advancement and learning and development. They talk about social capital, which is basically a positive work environment with high quality of relationships and trust, collaboration, cooperation. And then they talk about social support. So having support from the people around you. So kind of getting to what you were talking about, like the people, having support from your team leaders, your colleagues, coworkers, other people around you are supporting you. So those are the key resources they called out.
Yeah. So it seems like they kind of have a lot of resources that they called out, kind of varied.
Mm-hmm.
Did they get into tips for how to build those resources at all? Or do they group them together at all in like ways where they help people to kind of like focus their energy? It feels like there's quite a few that they're focused on.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot. So if you were to rank order, the first thing to focus on is leadership. So positive leadership practices are the most beneficial across the board. So if you have leaders that are not creating safe environments that people don't like, there's problems with your leaders, that's where you should focus. So as a company, focus on your leadership. If you're a leader, focus on how you can make sure that you're doing things effectively as a leader. Are you providing good feedback? Are you giving people safe spaces? Are you giving, equitable treatment to people, giving people opportunities for development, all of that. So leadership kind of encompasses a lot of it, and is the biggest one. So if you look across the research, that's the biggest driver. The second area is around the social piece. So they talk about social capital and social support. And then the third is learning and development. So if you were to rank order, start with making your leaders more effective in this, being there for their people, being able to, be high quality leaders so that people can then come to them with challenges, come to them if they need to take time away because of health issues, what have you, right? Are able to support their overall employee experience, then try to build a culture where that feeds off of the leaders to the coworkers to create positive, collaborative, supportive environments, and then make sure you're giving people opportunities to grow.
Yeah, that's
Those are your
super
three
helpful.
things.
That's super helpful because I think starting with the leaders is a really good insight because I feel like companies often think that the more you climb the leadership ranks, the worse you're expecting your job to be, or the like, well, you get paid more than other people, or you have a higher title, so you need to manage more crap than people at lower levels. And while there may be greater responsibilities and more stressful tasks that people have to do as they take on those responsibilities, the idea that you really need to make sure that your leaders are experiencing wellness themselves, checking in with them, making sure that they're able to role model these things, it sounds like, that they're able to really have the generative resources to pass on to other people on their team seems like kind of a no-brainer, but I also see in a lot of companies that they don't start there. They kind of go the opposite way. Like, well, yeah, you're a leader, so your life is not supposed to be as great, but we'll focus on the masses to make sure that those people are doing well. Whereas, like, this is kind of making the opposite case.
Yeah, exactly. It's start with those leaders, get them okay, get them healthy, and help them know how to then put that on other people, right? How to create an environment that they're going to be doing well, and not starting. Yeah, if you start at the employee level, it's a lot harder because employees don't have the same influence, right? So if you can get your leaders to a place where they're like, wow, I feel good, I'm able to work and maintain my health, then hopefully, I would hope most of those leaders would then want to give that back to their teams, right? And just continue this trickle down. And then they're going to learn those positive leadership behaviors. So if we have the most senior leaders really practicing this, then their leaders are going to learn from that. And then their managers are going to learn from that. And then the employees are going to learn from that, right? So they're all going to be able to kind of create this environment where we then go from those positive leadership practices to then also really supportive coworkers and colleagues. And you'll be in a good place. So I think I agree. It's not, don't start with the masses, start with the leaders. You're never going to be able to make a change if you want your employees to be the one driving their own sustainable work.
Yeah, I think that's a super useful takeaway. And obviously the other stuff that you mentioned from the social support and the learning and development and justice and the other things that you mentioned are also important. But I think it's cool to understand where if I'm strapped, where to spend my time.
Yeah, of course. I think it's definitely useful. I think, again, this is a really simple story here. It's all about just give people resources that they need and help them be, which will help them be both more productive and also healthier and more well at work. And then you're going to be in a really good position. So just thinking through as an employer, as a leader, thinking through how can you kind of shift the script. If you're in a situation where work isn't sustainable, people are working really long hours, their workloads are too high, they don't have the resources, they don't have the support from people around them, how can you start to make a change? And, I know we talked about gratitude a lot in the work that we've done in the podcasts in the back in the day around like how gratitude is contagious. A lot of times support can be contagious too, right? So if you're going to be that type of leader or that type of coworker that is doing things for others and like really being supportive of them, that's going to make that person then want to be supportive back to you. And then you're going to kind of create this chain of positivity that can kind of help create a more sustainable environment for everybody.
Yeah. And it's interesting because some of the components that we discussed up front, right, have to do with, people being in an environment where you're provided resources, which I would imagine, and I know from your experience as well, in terms of thinking about the autonomy and flexibility piece, that was also because the leaders around you did that and practiced that and had the ability to do that too. So it feels like what we shared at the beginning resonates quite a bit with some of the findings that are here. If you're finding yourself in an environment where you are seeing either that this is not on people's radar at all, or you're seeing that people are spending a lot of time, like the phrase, like putting out fires, like a lot of managers and senior leaders will be like, oh, well, I spend a lot of my day putting out fires. And this is kind of suggesting that it's better to kind of like, I don't know what analogy. It's better to plant flowers than to put out fires. Maybe that's a good thing.
Sure. I don't know exactly what that means, but okay.
It makes sense in my mind. But like, I feel like people do spend a lot of time, and they'll say like, well, I don't have time to focus on learning and development. I don't have time to get to know my employees. I don't have time to take care of myself, because all I'm doing all day is putting out fires. So if you're finding yourself in a position where it's sort of like a get rid of barriers culture, or a place where this is not on folks' radar at all, what would you suggest people do to kind of flip the narrative around on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like one of my favorite takeaways from this paper is just that there's no contradiction between what improves productivity and well-being. Like that is like a line in the paper. So this putting out fires culture, this I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that, those things, all that you're doing is adding busy work, and then you're going to be busier because you're doing all this stuff, but you're exhausted, you're not replenishing your resources, you're not doing okay. So you're just busy, 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 but you're actually not more productive if you had worked a normal schedule and normal hours in an environment that wasn't on fire constantly. So I would say kind of depends on who you are, right? If you're a leader and this is happening, I would say take a moment, take stock of what's going on, and try to identify that root cause. Like, why is everything on fire all the time? Is it because we've planned really poorly? Is it because we don't have the resources to do the things that we want to do? What is the cause, and how can you fix that? So if it is that, we're not planning well, it'll be better for your productivity if you just pause and start and spend a week planning and what priorities are first and what do you need to focus on right now and what can you focus on later. That I think is going to make a big difference. If the root cause is the fact that you don't have enough resources, well, look back and see what kind of resources do you need. Do you need better tools? Do you need more people? Is it the fact that people just don't have autonomy and so they're kind of sitting back, and so then now people have to, kind of dictate what people do instead of giving people the opportunity to do what they need to do right on their own? Like, what are the reasons why you're seeing these challenges? So as a leader, I think that's really, really crucial. If you're an employee and you're in an environment where everything's on fire all the time, what I would recommend is try to find some support within the environment. So maybe your leader isn't the person, but maybe there's a colleague, a coworker, a peer at a different team, somebody that you can find as a social support. So at least you've got someone out there, and that social support would be considered a job resource that could hopefully help you feel a little bit better and figure out your, how to work through some of this stuff. So I think that would be the first step if you're an employee, is think about your social support and what you can do to kind of improve that, since that's probably where you have the most control.
Yeah, I think those are great tips. And I think that it's always, this idea of quiet quitting, right? Like, I know that employers are seeing that people are leaving, but that's not always an option. And so you have to think about how to influence the environment that you're in and try to build some of these resources for yourself, or influence people who are responsible for those resources in a way that they might move the needle forward. And I think you're right. Like, it really does help that performance goals align with wellness goals. So even if you get somebody who is focused seemingly solely on that, or doesn't care at all about wellness, this is not counter to an argument that would benefit them. You might not even mention wellness at all. You might just say, I read this article that talks about how to increase productivity. So yeah, I think that that's a really positive set of takeaways. I really, really love this article. I think it's super relevant to what organizations need to hear right now, and will definitely help people to solve some of the problems that they may be experiencing in their organizations, with employees asking for better work and jobs that really respect that. So is there anything else that you think we should know about the article before we sign off here?
No, I don't think so. I think just remember that what helps you be better as an employee at work also helps you be better in your health and your wellness.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much.
Yeah, thanks all for listening. Really appreciate having you here. Hopefully you learned something. We thought this was a good article. If you have any questions for us, if you ever want to reach us, you can email us at contact@workerbeing.com. You can find us on our website, workerbeing.com, or on social media. And as always, you can join our community or support our work at workerbeing.com/community. Thanks for listening. Thriving at Work is hosted by us, Dr. Patricia Grabarek and Dr. Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.